Okay, so today we are going to be painting an apple together, and I have everything assembled here. I have my apple and I have it laid out, you'll notice, on a plain backdrop. I do have another light source coming from above so that I have a shadow cast from the apple. I have my canvas with my sketch already transferred over. I have my paints, I have my brushes and some water, and I have my palette ready to go. So before I transferred this sketch to the canvas, I did sketch it out on a regular piece of paper first. And you'll notice that I did observe my light source to be right at the top corner there. And so just like in my apple here, I tried to really look at it and saw that there was a ring of light reflecting just around this top part here. And I could also see the shadow being cast underneath. And because I have more than one light source, it complicates the shadow a little bit. It's darker immediately under the apple, and then there's also a shadow cast this way. And that's fine. I'll represent it in the painting that I create, but it's just something I wanted to point out. I did use graphite paper to draw on top of this sketch and transfer it right to the canvas here. And then I went back in with my 2B pencil and filled in some of the details and corrected some things. So the paints that I'm going to be using today, I have them laid out here. I think I'm going to need some cadmium yellow, alizarin crimson, naphthol red, Payne's gray, titanium white, and then on the end here I have chrome oxide green, which is a really nice natural kind of looking green, and I think I need that for just in the inside part, that little dip of the apple there, there's a bit of green. And I could mix that using cadmium yellow and ultramarine blue if I was just using a really small palette, but I have the chrome oxide green, so I thought I would throw it in. And I think when I'm looking at the apple here, I can see that there are kind of two types of red, and I wanted to be able to have the depth that the alizarin crimson will give me. So I laid those out on a disposable palette, and I'm never this neat and tidy in real life, but I wanted to have it all laid out really easily for you. So I have the colors here, and this is gonna get real messy in just a moment. In everyday life, I just use a piece of board that I found back in high school in my parents' house, I think in the furnace room, and I've been using this for every acrylic painting for just about forever, and I keep thinking that I will retire that and hang it on my wall as a piece, as my only piece of abstract art, my only abstract painting. I guess we'll see. I don't know, it's just very convenient to use, so I keep going back to it. I rarely use the disposable palettes except for oil painting. So I have this laid out here. This is gonna get real messy in just a moment. And for my brushes, I tried to find some acrylic brushes. It seems like I'm a little low these days. I haven't done an acrylic painting for a little while. I found some small ones here. It's a Filbert, Curry's Filbert brush. It's number 8. I have another Filbert here. It's a number 2 in this brand, and it's a hog's hair, the one on the left. And those are both kind of long handle, which aren't totally convenient for working up close, but that's what I had. And in the middle, I have a number 6 round, which, like I mentioned before, is basically my favorite kind of go-to brush. So how am I going to approach this? Well, first of all, I hope I don't mess this up for you. It could happen, but the nice thing about acrylic paints is that it's pretty easy just to go ahead and get started, so long as you do a little planning in advance. I have the titanium white on my palette here because we're going to use that for our highlights. And I think I've got everything positioned here, so we can go ahead and get started. So what do I think I will do first? Well, I didn't color my canvas at all. I'm just going to leave it this way. We're going to paint right on top of the gesso. Sometimes I like to tint the canvas like when I'm doing portraits, but I think we'll just go right in here and we'll start with our darkest colors. Darkest colors first. We'll try to kind of follow the rules. And I always have a piece of paper towel in one hand. And I'm just going to use water. So starting with my soft filbert brush here, we'll see how this goes. I'm going to take some, looks like alizarin crimson, and I'm looking along the edge here. Come in. Just like that. You can see there's this dark all the way along. And as I'm painting, I may lose that stem in the middle there. I should try as much as I can to kind of obey those lines. But the thing is, I mean, this is not a drawing, it's an acrylic painting. So you kind of have to work within the properties of the paint. So what I'm doing right now is I'm just trying to figure out this apple, and I can see that there's a lot of dark right here where I've put in some paint, and I might just extend it down here. And I think I've said before that I try to approach acrylic painting as if it's kind of sculptural. So I put some paint down and I leave it. I try not to fuss, and I'm going to bring that dark right up here. It is kind of weird to paint on camera because I'm trying to make good decisions as I go along. So I started with the alizarin crimson, and that is good in those spots there, but I want it to be a little more red for these areas here, coming around and then down here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut that alizarin crimson, which is really, it's a strong color. I'm going to cut it with a bit of naphthol red, which some people use as an alternative to cadmium red sometimes, or just as a color unto itself. And I'm looking along that crest there at the top, and I'm just gonna have a line like that, and I can see kind of that dimple there. So I'll bring my paint around like that to join, and truly it doesn't matter if you mess up. Try to keep your paint a little more thin, on the thin side, because when it dries, then you'll be more likely to just be able to cover it up. Cover up your mistakes. That is why acrylic paint is just so forgiving. And I'm just gonna take a little more water there. I do realize that my apple is looking quite red, but that's okay, because all I want to do right now is fill in some of these red areas. And that's just fine. And I try to approach things as if I'm going to be layering my paint, which I will be later on. And I also don't really fuss too much with the background in this case, because I like that my background is really plain, and I think what I'll do is I'm going to do a nice really like hard kind of line around my apple after to give it a lot of focus. So I don't really care if my background is blended into my apple. There's some pink there. I'm gonna make it a little lighter. So it's really, really powerful color. You can see some of the light along the edge there, so I'm just cutting in with that, and I think that's a good start for the red. So going to wash off this brush in my water, and now I'm going to keep the mixture that has begun on my palette. So you can see it's getting messy already. And I'm going to cut in with some cadmium yellow, and I'm going to start to warm that up with my cadmium yellow. Okay, and almost make like a pinky orange. And when you start to get an eye for the colors, you'll start to think, yeah, that's looking a little bit like what's happening in there. You just want to warm up your red, and again, just working in thin colors. So I'm gonna come in here and start to warm things up. Just one line. And this is all, we're not doing an underpainting here, but this is forming an underpainting. And I just find that acrylic works better for me when there's an underpainting, when there's some paint down on top of the gesso for subsequent layers to kind of grip to. And I'm not fussing at all here. I'm looking at the apple. I'm constantly remixing as I go. So I'm just working from this lighter little bit there. I'm constantly looking as I paint, and I never like mix up like a huge quantity of one color, because I just know that every paint stroke is going to be different. So I'm starting to represent all of that there. And I think now I'm gonna start to cut in and rinse off my brush. Doesn't really matter if it's too clean in this case, but don't want things to get muddy. So maybe we should err more towards being clean. And now I'm gonna take my yellow and I'm gonna dull it down or just lighten it up a bit with my titanium white. And I think take the smallest, see, I'm barely taking any. I definitely, oh, that was too much, too green. What I'm trying to do is I'm trying to approach something that looks like those two yellow spots on the apple. Lighten that a bit more. I think I've got it there. So I'm really happy with that. Just gonna mix it a bit more, keeping things fairly thin on my brush. I like that the paint is wet because this is like a natural, see, it's a natural way to blend these areas together. It's a bit too much red there, it's okay. And I just start to cover. Just like, I don't know why, I feel like I'm a sculptor when I'm doing this. more. Just mixing up a bit more there, like that. These are pretty defined areas. And again, just working on this section here. It's like sometimes I feel like when I start a painting, everything looks terrible. Maybe not right at the start. At the start, I'm usually pretty hopeful because I'm happy with my sketch and I think things are going to go well. But then I get to a part in the middle somewhere and I often feel like, oh, it's awful. And I've found with time that it's better to have a little bit of persistence and to kind of see that horrible awkward stage through. It's like being an awkward teenager. You just need to see that awkward stage of the painting through. I mean, sometimes, don't get me wrong, sometimes painting is terrible and it can't be salvaged and you seem to get rid of it. But more often than not, it's just an awkward time, and if you do persevere and follow through, you'll kind of get to another side, not necessarily the other side, but you might get to a different place, and you'll feel like, okay, that's good, that's shaping up, that's starting to look like something. So I'm just filling things in here, and it is starting to approximate my apple. This is not the final painting, but the point of this part right now is to be laying down color, and then we can give it a break for a little bit and come back and finish up with our details. But what you can see that I've done now is I've mapped out the geography of these two yellowy green spots. I've created the dark areas with my alizarin crimson. And when you do give something a break, then you can come back in later on and you can make changes and take a look at it, with a more critical eye. And I also feel like a break is kind of necessary, and then you can come back in and you can do your highlights or touch them up. I am going to add a little bit of highlight now, and usually something, unless it's really, really bright light, it's not going to totally reflect just white light. Just want to be careful about that, but I can see there's a really nice little highlight there, and I feel kind of excited to paint that, so get that down. Again, I try as much as possible, another highlight there, just one stroke with my paintbrush. If I don't like it, I can just let it be and then come back later on, but I don't want to fuss. There. So these are just going to play all along the top of my apple. And for the sake of painting, it's okay to make decisions where you say, I would like that highlight to be a little more prominent, to know, what, that's going to give this just a little bit more oomph, a little bit more realism, a little bit more contrast that I might need for my painting to really pop. I just love that highlight right there. I think that's just about the prettiest thing right now. So I can feel now I'm starting to fuss, so I think I need to just stop with the apple and we can start to fill in some other areas. So I'm gonna wash off my paintbrush. I think for this apple, I'm going to keep, because you can decide to do whatever you like, I'm going to keep the table like a light yellow color, like a pure kind of cadmium yellow, with a little bit of titanium white mixed into it. So I like the light yellow of my board there. So the titanium white's already been kind of destroyed. So I'm just mixing that up. And I'm gonna make my brush pretty wet. I'm not using anything like extender or retarder for this painting, just because I don't really think I need it. And I'm gonna start cutting in with my yellow. Like that. And then, of course, for this, I always try to work in layers. For this first layer here, I just care more about getting paint down. Sometimes I find that the gesso doesn't react the same way to the paint as when you have a few layers of paint, and just seems more accepting of future layers. Coming back in. I know my light source is up here, so I want that to stay nice and light. We have so many animals in our home that I don't know how it happens, but sometimes when I'm painting, I'll notice usually a dog hair in the paint, and I don't want that to dry there because that will just be a permanent thing, but it's always really hard to get that back out. There's always dog hair everywhere. I'm liking this. You can just be as free as you want. This is a flat brush. This is a 1/2 inch, just flat. But I really like it for cutting in my edge. I'm keeping it thin here. I can still see the lines for my shadow. Don't want to disturb that alizarin crimson and then get a big streak through my paint. So I'm being respectful of it there. I want to keep things a bit lighter in the distance, so using a pretty light touch like that. And remember, my light source is back here, so I just want to keep things light. And then get a little more intense in the foreground, like that. So how am I gonna mix the shadow here? Well, I've decided to go with a yellow table because I think that looks nice with the apple, and the opposite color of yellow, and this is exactly how I think through the process, is purple. So you don't have to have a tube of purple. I have my light mix that I've been using here, and I want to stay within this tone, so I'm just going to use this and then mix my colors into it. And this is just where I get messy, and I just don't really care. So I have nice mix. It's already kind of the same intensity of yellow that I'm going to want, and so I can take a little more yellow here, and I'm looking at the shadow of the apple there. I'm going to take my Payne's Gray, which is already like a blue-black. I love it. It's just so versatile. So I'm mixing that with my yellow, and then I'm going to take my alizarin crimson, because I know that blue and red make purple. So I mix those together, and in adding them to the yellow, I've made a lovely kind of neutral gray, and that's what I'm going to use for the darkest part of my shadow there. And again, I can correct and lighten that, but that is going to be my base color. And how do you know that you've achieved neutral gray? Well, the way I look at it, that's neither purple, green, blue or yellow. To me, it looks fairly neutral. So I'm good with that, and it's just a feeling that you've got there. But if it was more kind of this color here, that's just too green, and this is what I'm going to use. So as I'm chatting, my paint is drying so quickly. It's one of the great things about acrylic paint, but also just something that I found after a while to be a real kind of challenge for me, because I like to come back and blend, but there, shadow comes out like that. Okay, and then what I want is for that to be a bit lighter. So I'm just mixing some white in to my original. This is why we use so much white. There we go. And I'm going to take a little more white. Oops. Snapball red, not what I wanted. This is like chewing gum and walking at the same time. It's hard to have my brain in and do both. Usually this is just done on autopilot, kind of. So what I'm doing here is I'm just mixing a little bit lighter and a little bit more yellow for the lightest part of my shadow, because that's the table and the lightest shadow would still appear a bit yellow. So I'm going to come in with that there. And I always have like the lightest kind of touch. I'm not beating up the canvas here. Blend that together. Sorry, just found another dog hair. Working as I'm going. And for stuff like this, I just love like painterly lines, so I'm happy when I put paint down we get really like nice interesting line like that. And there is like the tiniest bit of shadow right behind the apple, so come back in like this. Okay, so I feel like I'm satisfied with the shadow now, and I'm thinking for my background, meaning the background up there, I think it'd be like really nice to have it be kind of high contrast with everything else that's going on. So I'm just gonna clean off my brush here and my well-used piece of paper towel. I have like a million rolls in the art room at all times, and my Payne's Gray hasn't been used too much yet, so I'm going to take Payne's Gray, I'm going to take alizarin crimson, I'm going to need a bit more of that. I overdid it on the Payne's Gray, so I'll just help myself to a little bit more. And I want like a purpley, dark purpley background, because I've been talking about color mixing lately, and that will really help to contrast with my yellow table here. So I know my table's not, or my background's not yellow in real life, but I'm gonna cut in with that color there. because you're allowed to make some decisions like that. And if I paint this and then I decide that is awful, it's okay, because I can go get a coffee, fold some laundry, take the dogs out, and just let it dry. Actually, I would probably just need to go get a coffee and your paint would already be dry. Turning my flat brush on right on its edge there. Cutting in here. See some areas I'm leaving a little more alizarin crimson-y. I think that looks nice to have it not be just totally one color, but for it to be a dark color. I like that. Brush is getting a little too dry there. I hate when paint kind of skips on the canvas. I hate that. Like a pet peeve. So I love just perfect lines. I guess it means it's not always necessarily very relaxing for me, but it is what it is. I'm sorry because my hand's blocking your view there. Okay, so I've cut in like that, and I can already see one thing that I want to fix before I forget to acknowledge it, and I'm probably going to come back to this in a moment. So my dark shadow background color that I mixed up, I'm just going to add the tiniest little bit of yellow to a section of it, again just to approach a more neutral color. And then I kind of lost a bit of my contrast there. So I've come in with my round brush. And just finishing that off. And I can hear the trotting of a dog. Who are you? Hello, Riggs. He's just come in to say hello. I'm sure he's just doing some rounds around the house. It's very cold here today, and while I ventured out yesterday with the dogs, I'm doubting that's going to happen today because I actually felt slightly irresponsible yesterday. So I'm going to leave the apple like this for now. I want to let it dry. The paint's just in like kind of a tacky stage, and it's always a good idea to let things dry so you can take another look at them later on. You know, grab yourself a cup of coffee, have a conversation with the painting, see what needs to be corrected at this stage, and what's your favorite, what you might want to come back to. For your own paintings, you know, you can feel free. You can use yellow for your table. You can do whatever you want for your background, but certainly I'm gonna let this dry and then come back to it and finish it off in the next part. So that's what I'm gonna do. All right, so I've let this painting dry for a little while, and I've been back and looking at it. I think I need to kind of come in with a bit more detail now on the apple, and these edges are pretty rough. They need to be cleaned up. And I haven't addressed the green little inside part that should be there and kind of given that a bit more depth. I need to clean up whatever's going on the table here. I think I'm not like totally happy with the color either. The yellow might be a little too bright for me right now. I need to do something about the stem as well. Yeah. And I'm not sure if I'm going to keep this background color as dark as I have it. I might just go ahead and make that light yellow just to show you how versatile acrylic paints are. Kind of still undecided about that, but what I'm going to do now is I'm just going to dive back in to the painting. Going to speed up the tempo a little bit, and you can just follow along as I keep painting, and then I'll check back in with you. All right, that's it for how to paint acrylics for absolute beginners. I hope that this information has been helpful for you. And if you did paint along with me, or if you finish up your painting at a later date, please post a photo of your apple painting in the comments below. I would love to see your work and how you make out. So once again, thank you for visiting evachristensenart.com. Stay tuned for more tutorials, and come back for more helpful blog posts and information. Take care.